Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Dayu the Flood Conqueror from 2+ Games, which has got to be in the running for one of the most unique board game names I have ever played. This is a game where it takes place in historical China, where there was this actual emperor named Dayu, I'm not sure exactly what his full name was, who was famous for actually saving a province in China from the overflow of the Yellow River, which was flooding and threatening to destroy the entire countryside. He swooped in and with his knowledge and know-how and taking charge there, he saved a lot of people and he became like one of the greatest emperors, something to that effect. Now, in gameplay terms, what this game is, you and the other players are using cards, like sort of a hand management type situation, and trying to put drainage, drainage ditches or put drainage facilities and things on all these different flooded provinces in order to become like the most exemplary agents of the Emperor. Okay, I'm a little confused by the theme if you can't tell, but you get the gist of it. Let me go ahead and show you how the game works, then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Alright, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of Dayu the Flood Conqueror. This is a competitive game for 2 to 4 players. The goal is to have the most victory points by the end of the game. The end of the game is going to occur when the pile of flood cards has run out and every player has had an equal number of turns. Now, this setup is for a 4-player game. You are going to use a certain amount of flood cards in play depending on the number of players, and in fact, you will randomly remove some of the flood cards, again, depending on the number of players, just to adjust the game length. Each player is also going to start with 3 tool cards in play, taken 1 each from the top of the deck in turn order, then you're going to start the game. Each player also, there's 3 different colors by the way, silver, green, and red. Each player is also going to get a little asset card here, which is, of course, is Chinese, I can't understand it, but you should use it because you need to keep track of which color every player is. But also, this is where you're going to stow tool cards once they have been used and become victory point cards. We'll get to all that. Also note that the tool cards are double-sided, but you always make sure that they are shuffled up and kept with the rune icon side on face up, and players are not allowed to just grab those and look at the other side of them. You have to keep them the way they are until you've drawn them. Then you can look at them in secret. Players will randomly start off on different flood cards at the start of the game. You'll put all the drainage tokens in the middle of the table, and then you will randomly determine who's going to go first and begin the game. First, a brief explanation of the tool cards. The tool cards are the main way that you are going to fight the flood and therefore rip through those flood cards, claim them as both action, special abilities and points, and then proceed through the course of the game. Like I said, you'll start off with 3 of these tool cards, and you'll be able to gain more, which I'll explain once I get through the turn explanation. But there's 3 different colors of cards, and they're all the number of tool symbols that you can gain from each of them is all formatted a little bit differently. For the silver cards, there's always 1 tool of one of the 4 colors on one side, and then on the other side there will be 2 sets of 2. But as far as what dispensation of them there are, it's a bit random, so you can't really count on being able to grab a card and knowing what's on the other side. And remember, you can't look at the other side of it before you grab it. For the green cards, it is set in stone. On one side of the card, there's always 2 tools of 2 different colors, and on the other side are the other 2 colors that are not featured on the other side. Notice as well that the victory points, which are the top number the top of the card, change depending on which side of the card it's on. I'll get back to that in a minute as well. And then for the red cards, you always have 3 of 1 tool on one side, and then on the other side, you will have an either or of 1 tool. So you can't, when you use this tool card, you can't get both of these symbols, you'll get one or the other, whereas if it's any of the other cards or the other side of the red card, you'll get all 3 of the symbols depicted on the card. Now, the tools are used in the main mechanism of the game, which is fighting the flood. Players are going to be moving to different flood cards, and obviously they'll start off on a flood card during the course of the game. And what they are trying to do is put these drainage tokens, which I accidentally left on the card during setup, down onto the flood cards. And you're going to be using those tools in order to do that. It's a color matching game. So let's say, for instance, I used this card that gave me 3 of the green tools, which I'm the name is escaping me because it's kind of hard to see what they are. I would be able to put 3 drainage tokens on 3 drainage tokens on the green symbols here, and you have to be able to use the entirety of the card. So, for instance, I could use a card that only lets me put 1 green symbol, 1 green drainage token on it. But I would not be able to use a card that lets me put 4 there because there aren't 4 spaces. I have to use the full power of the card. Now, as I said, you'll be moving from card to card, which means that other players are going to have the opportunity to go onto your card and can potentially use their own tools in order to try and finish it. But what's important is whoever finishes the last spot on one of the flood cards is going to be the person to claim it. So if green came over here, dropped a couple of the last tools down, or remember you will be able to use more than 1 tool, I'll explain that in a minute, then they are actually going to claim this card. Both player pawns are going to be moved off. You'll get rid of all the drainage tokens, and that player is going to be able to claim this flood card, which will immediately get replaced by the deck. If the deck runs out, that's going to trigger the end of the game. Now, each of these flood cards is going to have different special abilities and powers once you gain control of them for yourself. So, for instance, this is actually a victory point condition. At the end of the game, every silver tool card that you've taken as a victory point card is going to be worth +1 victory points. This ability here gives you -2 victory points at the end of the game, but you get 1 free move of your pawn every turn. Then there are cards like this and like this one up here, which give you a few victory points, positive victory points, and you gain 1 tool of the appropriate color per turn. This just lets you automatically put down one of the drainage tokens onto a card that needs that symbol. All right, actually, just to clarify, you take the flood card at the end of the turn on which it's completed. So the current player takes it at the end of that player's turn. Anyways, here's how your turns are going to go. At the start of your turn, you have 3 action points to spend, and you're going to spend those 3 points to do a multitude of actions. One of them is to use one of your tool cards. If you use a tool card, you're gaining the symbols off of it and putting out drainage tokens on the flood card that you're on, and then you are stuffing it, you're flipping it over, or I'm sorry, you're putting it the way it is currently underneath your player aid card. That represents, it is now a victory point card for the end of the game. The next thing you can do is spend 1 action point in order to move to an adjacent card in either direction that you want. You will move to the next flood card, and now your cards will influence that instead. You can spend action points just to flip your cards over. So this is the main way in which you're going to be able to utilize the other sides of your cards. You will spend a point, take one of the cards that you have, and flip it back and flip it over to its other side. You can do this as many times as you want. So if you flip a card over now, expecting that you'll want to use it next turn and change your mind, you can flip it back to its other side. Once it's on its other side and you use it, then it will be locked in on that side, and whenever you put it underneath your player aid card as a victory point card, meaning that this is also the way in which you're going to improve your cards to get better points. Finally, the other type of action you can do, aside from just doing nothing, is discarding your cards. You simply spend an action point and get rid of all the cards you have by putting them on the bottom of the deck. Therefore, freeing up your play area to draw 3 brand new cards at the end of your turn, which you will always do anyways. You'll always draw back up to 3 tool cards in front of you from any piles of your choice. You don't have to have 3 of the same color. That's only at the start of the game. That's basically it. You're going to be using your tool cards in order to put out drainage tokens of the appropriate in the appropriate colored spot on the flood cards in order to take those flood cards as special powers and victory points, and to try to use the best tools that you have represented by the different sides of the card in order to gain as many victory points as possible from that. Whoever has the most at the end of the game is the winner. Ties go to the person with the most flood cards. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. Even putting aside the name, Dayu the Flood Conqueror, the actual game itself is very interesting. Not like any game I've played in quite a while. Let's start off with the theme and the components. The theme is pretty tenuously linked to the actual mechanisms of the game, although I think it's a great concept. It's something I'd like to see explored in a bigger, grandiose game where you can actually kind of feel that theme working. Here, it kind of works. Like, yeah, okay, whatever you're supposed to be doing, putting these drainage tokens out or digging ditches and using all these tools, but I guess it could be rethemed to pretty much anything. But again, I do like the concept. As far as the presentation of it, I think it looks really cool when it's all set up and you're playing the game, and putting out all these tokens is a neat idea. So I just think that it would have been better for there to be tiles instead of the flood cards. It's probably my biggest complaint with the components, not just because it would look nicer, but because practically speaking, I don't know if every set of the game was like this, but my set came with cards that were not warped or, bent's the wrong word, but they were curled in a certain direction. In fact, it happened to be the direction that they were sitting on, meaning that it was really hard to put the drainage tokens onto the card. You couldn't tell that in my overview because I spent a lot of time bending the cards, which is probably anathema to people who love the components of games. And for that regard, I think it would have been better as tiles, but I understand they wanted to keep the scope and cost of the game down. But what about the mechanisms? Well, it's really interesting. I love the idea of the tool cards, which double as victory point cards. I think that's a very fascinating concept because you can't see the cards ahead of time. You have some knowledge of what might be on the other side, especially for the green cards. But you need to be able to make sure that you're grabbing cards that are going to be the most helpful to you because this is an action efficiency game at its heart. You have so few actions and you're rushing to complete these different tasks, and you need the right tools for the job, but you also want to maximize your victory points because that's where the lion's share of your victory points are going to come from. So you want to make sure you're not only grabbing the right tools to use, but that they're going to be on the side that's going to be most beneficial to you as well. And sometimes those things just don't match, and you need to rush to complete a flood card as quickly as possible before someone else does. And you end up just taking a silver card and possibly getting 0 points. But those are some of the decisions you have to make during the course of the game. But I love the idea of flipping the cards and utilizing them in different ways. I always say I like it when a game can when a card can do multiple things and can be used in a variety of ways. And this was a very intriguing way to do that. Now, having said that, I and a lot of the other players I played this game with found a lot of frustration with trying to complete the different flood cards based on what tools were actually available, because sometimes nothing is going to work right for you. You find yourself in a situation where you don't have enough actions to get to a card where placing drainage tokens down would actually be useful to you, and they're just going to be helping another player complete their stuff sooner. And sometimes you really can't do much of anything based on the cards that are on the tops of the stacks, which means that you have to essentially waste a turn just spending an action to discard all of your cards and get a bunch of cards hoping that you get what you need, which is especially frustrating when you can't see what's on the back of the silver and the red cards. Only the green ones you have some forecasted knowledge of what's going to be there. I don't think that's by any means a huge issue, but it was quite a bit of frustration there. Now, one thing I will say is that the special abilities on the flood cards are everything. You get the special abilities on those cards, there's like a snowball effect going on where the more you get, the stronger you get, and it almost becomes impossible to beat someone who has too many of those special abilities, unless they really trip up, which, to be fair, I did in our first game. The game was mine, and I totally blew it. It's not worth going into the details. But being able to do free moves, being able to do free, putting out just even one drainage token of any color, doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's huge. Getting free flips of the cards is something I didn't show in the overview, but there's a special ability that lets you flip over a card for free. They don't sound like they're a big deal in and of themselves, but remember, you get 3 actions per turn. So getting a free one of any of those actions is phenomenal. Not to mention the point scoring cards that give you +1 for every card of a certain color that you have. That can quickly become incredible and game-changing in that regard. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that aspect of the game is a bad thing, but I am saying that it makes the game just a little more tense because you're rushing to get these flood cards and you really don't want to let someone else have one of those awesome abilities, even if it means that you can't get it. Well, there's not really a way to do that. That's the thing. You don't want to let someone have a great special ability, and you want to get it first, and sometimes it's just not going to happen, so you need to focus on another card and hope to get your own special ability, but you may not have the right cards for that. So that's where the frustration of the game can sort of seep in. Now, it might sound like I'm being pretty negative, but the truth is, I like this game quite a lot. It's very interesting, very innovative, and those frustrations that I have with sort of the snowballing of one player getting too far ahead of the pack and of the frustration with not being able to get the right symbols, those would be more aggravating in a much longer game. This game, like I said, is pretty quick. You learn it very fast, you get playing really quickly, and it's casual enough but strategic enough that I think it's going to appeal to a wide variety of people. And so for those reasons, I dig it, and it's going to be staying in my collection. And also, again, there's just not any other game like it, and there's no other game where I can say Dayu the Flood Conqueror and say it in a very powerful voice. That's how you have to pronounce it. So that is Dayu the Flood Conqueror from 2+ Games. Pretty cool. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.